Hello and welcome to the course of Indian History presented to you by Plus Prameshi Library. So here we are covering Tamil Nadu class 11 book and we are covering the ancient history part. Okay, before we move forward, this is something about me. I'm Supriya Singhal, mentor for this course, and you can connect with me on Instagram by the name of Crispy Stories. So it's a food blog and I'm sure you will love it. Now we will start with the unit 6 of Tamil Nadu class 11 book. Okay, so until now we've discussed the ancient history, okay, of India, both northern India as well as southern India. And the southern India we last finished till Rashtrakutas, and now we will study about the imperial Cholas, which is the last empire before we move on to medieval India. Okay, so let's start with the lesson number 13, which is about the imperial Cholas. So you will find that first of all Sangam age was there. Okay, and after Sangam age declined, see Sangam age had three kingdoms. Remember Cholas, Cheras and Pandyas. So after the decline of Sangam period, the Cholas which were there, they became the fiduciaries in Urayur. And Urayur, if you know, Urayur, Poompuhar, remember these towns? So these towns are very famous towns for export and import, like trading towns you can say. So the Cholas became fiduciaries in Urayur, okay, and they became prominent again in the 9th century, and they established an empire comprising the major portion of South India. Like their empire became much more vast, much more wide than it was present in the 200 AD, okay, and now their capital became Tanjore or Tanjore. Now they also extended their sway in Sri Lanka. Okay, that means if you see that this Sri Lanka is somewhere here, because you have like this Rameshwaram etc., and then you have like Sri Lanka. So now here are Cholas with their capital at Tanjore, and you will find that they also like extended their influence on Sri Lanka. Okay, and also in Malay Peninsula. Now Malay Peninsula is basically Malaysia, Indonesia. So if you know, it will be somewhere here. Okay, so here also they have extended their influence. Therefore, these Cholas are also called as imperial Cholas. Okay, and thousands of inscriptions have been found in temples in which we can find the detailed information about what was the society, what was the culture, what was the architecture, what was the administration, everything. Okay, about this Chola period. The founder of the imperial Chola was Vijayalaya, that you need to remember. So just like we do the chronology of all the kings, we will do it once we cover 2-3 more kings. So the founder of imperial Chola empire is Vijayalaya, and he captured actually Tanjore from Muttarayars in 815 AD, and he built a temple for Durga, marking his presence that now he is basically the ruler over there. Then his son Aditya, he put an end to Pallava kingdom by defeating Aprajita. Remember the last Pallava ruler Aprajita, and he annexed Tondai Mandalam. Then came the Karnataka one, who was an early important Chola ruler, and he was the one who defeated the Pandyas and the ruler of Ceylon. Ceylon means Sri Lanka, and this is how you can say that they are extending their empire. Like the first one is a Vijayalaya, who is just like establishing the empire by defeating Muttarayars, and he makes Tanjore as his capital. Then you will find that to mark his presence, he has built a temple at Durga. Then his son is there, Aditya, who is basically fighting with Pallavas and then defeating them to acquire Tondai Mandalam. So now the empire is extended. Now after them comes the Karnataka one, who is basically going abroad, going foreign, and also capturing Sri Lanka or the Ceylon. So now the empire is extended much more. Okay. Then you will find that this Karnataka one, he suffered a defeat from Rashtrakutas, okay, in the battle of Takulam. So in the battle of Takulam, remember, imperial Cholas are not winning. Who was winning? Rashtrakutas. And Karnataka won, but you will realize that he was a great builder of temples. Okay, he also provided the Viman of the Nataraja temple at Chidambaram. So what is a Viman? Viman is not that flying machine. Viman is basically here the this pyramidical shaped top part of the temple. Okay, the Dravid style of architecture. Remember, I told you that there will be a pyramidical shaped Viman, okay, which goes towards the top, where lot of sculptures are also placed, and lot of you will find that lot of gods are also placed here. So this Viman, you will find one of the famous Vimans is built by this Karnataka one ruler. Okay, and on which temple? On Nataraja temple at Chidambaram with a golden roof. Just like we have an Amritsar golden temple, you have this Viman also with a golden roof. Now two famous Uttara Merur inscriptions that give a detailed account of the village administration under the Cholas, they also belong to his reign only. That means what? It tells you that there were inscriptions, there was a lot of detailed knowledge available about the Chola Empire, and that is why we just don't know only about 2-3 rulers, we know the entire chronology. Okay, now what we'll do is we'll study about two most important rulers, okay, of this imperial Chola time, which is Raja Raja I and Rajendra I. Okay, so Raja Raja I, his rule was there from 985 to 1014 AD. Okay, and it was under him and his son Rajendra I that the Chola Empire reached its climax, like reached its highest point. So now we will study that why was it so. So Raja Raja I took many military conquests, and we will learn about his military conquest just shortly. So the first one is the defeat of the Chera ruler. Okay, who's the Chera ruler? So Chera, Cholas, Pandyas are still existing, but it's just the power is not same what existed in probably 200 AD, because now Pallavas are there, Chalukyas are there, Rashtrakutas are there, and they're all fighting for the same space. Okay, so now what is happening? There's a Chera ruler, Bhaskar Varivarman. Okay, and you will find that he has been defeated in this naval battle. The word important here is the naval battle. The battle is not fought on land, it is fought in the sea. So naval battle is there, Kandal Surasalai, and the destruction is of Chera Navy is very heavily done, and that is why you will find that Cheras are defeated by the imperial Cholas. And who is leading the Cholas? Raja Raja Varman. So Raja Raja I. Okay, so now how do you remember this? So what you can do in your copies is basically have this circle, write Raja Raja I over here, okay, and in bracket write his military conquest, okay, and after that start putting arrows so that you remember in just one small like this chart the entire expeditions done by the military expeditions taken by Raja Raja I. So first is basically he is obviously defeating Chera ruler. Okay, then you will find that he has defeated the Pandyas also, okay, Amar Bhujanga, and he established the Chola authority over Pandyas also. So Cheras and Pandyas are gone now. Then comes the conquest of Gangavati, Tadikapaddi, okay, Nolam Padapai, and they are all in the Mysore region. So instead of remembering these three until you are sitting for the civil services examination in that particular state, you just can write here that basically Mysore region is also defeated. And where is Mysore present? It is basically present in Karnataka. Then you will find that there is invasion of Sri Lanka also happening. See, one of his, you can say one of his predecessors or ancestors also did it, and now he is also invading Sri Lanka again. And then he basically gives the Sri Lanka to Rajendra I, who is his son. Okay, and you will find as a Sri Lankan king Mahinda V, he fled away from his country. Then Cholas extended. So this is like Sri Lanka. There is northern part and there is southern part. So in northern part you will find that Sri Lanka, northern part of Sri Lanka, the Cholas had a huge influence, okay, and the capital also was shifted from Anuradhapura to Polanaruva, where a Shiva temple was also built to mark the presence of Raja Raja I. So Sri Lanka is also gone now. Then the next is basically Western Chalukyas, okay, of Kalyani. So he also defeats Western Chalukyas of Kalyani, and Satyas Raya was defeated by Raja Raja I, who captured the Rauchur Doab, Banvasi and other places, okay, and hence you can say now basically the Chola Empire has reached till Krishna Tungabhadra basin. Then after this you will find there is basically the Vengi. So the restoration of Vengi throne to its rulers Saktivarman and Velamaditya by defeating the Telugu Cholas, okay, and Raja Raja also basically married his daughter Kundavi in the marriage to Vimaladitya. So he is trying to basically restore one of the traditional rulers of a place called Vengi, and he also marries basically his daughter to them. So what he has done, now you can see so many military conquests, north, south, east, west, and everywhere he is winning. That means he is really powerful. Then his last military expedition was in Maldives, where he was basically naval expedition was carried against the Maldivians, and finally he also conquered Maldives. So Sri Lanka is gone, and then basically obviously the next step is Maldives. So now you know that by these so many conquests, the Chola Empire has really expanded its reach. Okay, Pandyas gone, Cheras gone, then Tamil Nadu, then Krishna Tungabhadra basin also, Sri Lanka, Maldives, everything like from north to south to east to west. And Raja Raja I assumed number of titles. Obviously, he's winning each after like one after another. Every battle he's winning, and that is why you'll find that he has taken many titles to himself, like Mumbidi Chola, like Jayan Konda, like Sivapada Sekra, okay, and he was a devout follower of Shaivism, and that is why he keeps establishing Shiva temples wherever he is winning, okay, to mark his presence and to also expand Shaivism. Okay, he completed the construction of this famous Raja Rajeshwara temple or Brihadeshwara temple, also called as the Temple of Thousand Pillars, a thousand pillar temple. Okay, so Rajarajeshwaram, Brihadeshwara, thousand pillar temple, and it was established in around 1010 AD, and in 2010 AD, which was basically in 2010, India celebrated its 1000 years. Okay, and it is also like it is in the great Chola temples, great Chola living monuments, they're all basically mentioned in the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Okay, so this is also part of UNESCO World Heritage Site. And you will find that he also, see, he is a devout Shaivite, but in spite of that, he is not actually, he's not killing other religions, etc. He's very, very tolerant. He's like he's, you can say, he's not patronizing as such any other religion, but he is not also being like you can say rude to them. Like, he's very tolerant towards them, and that is why you will find that he also helped in construction of a Buddhist monastery at Nagapattinam. Okay, and when we move forward, you will realize that this Nagapattinam is also one of the European company's main bases, and that if you know, then you write it in the comment box right now, but if you don't know, then you can wait for modern history to start. Then we basically come to his son, Rajaraja's son, which is Rajendra I. Okay, and Rajendra also, just like his father, had demonstrated his military abilities, because he also participated first in his father's campaigns, and he continued whatever his father's legacy was by expanding, expanding his empire even more than what his father left him. Okay, by military conquest. So now what we will do, we'll study about the military conquest of what? Of Rajendra I. So here also again I'll write Rajendra I. Okay, in bracket I'll write military conquest, and then I'll make a circle and start making arrows. Okay, so the first one is Bahinda V, who is the king of Sri Lanka. He attempted to recover obviously his lost territories, which was captured by Rajaraja I, his father. But what is happening, that Rajendra again defeats him, and he instead seizes his own territory, okay, in Sri Lanka. And thus you will find now, see, northern part of Sri Lanka came under Rajaraja I, but it is Rajendra who finally conquers the whole Sri Lanka and made it as an important part of Chola Empire. Then secondly, he reasserted to ensure that Cheras and Pandyas, which were defeated by his father, they are not trying to recoup back or recover back their territories. So he actually tries to reassert the Chola authority over both Cheras and Pandyas. Then he also defeats the Western Chalukyan king, okay, at the river of Tungabhadra. And who is the Western Chalukyan king? Jayasimha II. So you don't need to remember this, but you need to remember that he also defeats Western Chalukyas. Okay. Then you will find that his most famous military enterprise was his expedition to North India, and this is extremely famous because this is what earns him a one title, and on basis of that only he constructs a temple and names it accordingly. So what is happening now? Rajendra I, see, Rajaraja I was basically conquesting in mostly south and also the kingdoms which are nearby, but he never ventured north of India. But Rajendra I, because he knew that his father has already captured so much of south, that he now needs to go, if he wants to expand his empire, he needs to expand his empire in the north. So now you will find that he is actually taking an expedition, military expedition in the north, and he crosses the Ganga river and he defeats number of rulers on its way. And Rajendra, this one, he also defeats Mahipala. Okay, who's the Mahipala? Is the ruler of Bengal, the Pala rulers of Bengal. So that only one of them is Mahipal. So he defeats Mahipal, and to commemorate that how successful he has been in defeating the North Indian kings, he actually establishes a city and calls it Gangai Konda Cholapuram. Now this Gangai Konda Cholapuram is a long word, but if you break it, it's easy. Gangai, Konda and Cholapuram. Gangai means Ganges. Konda means obviously someone who has defeated Ganges, and who is it? Cholas. So Cholas are now having power on Ganga, and to ensure that people remember it for long, he actually named the city as Gangai Konda Cholapuram, and he also constructed a temple called as Rajeshwaram temple or Gangai Konda Cholapuram temple in that city itself. Okay, and you will find that he also constructed large amount of irrigation tanks also called as Chola Gangam on the western side of the city. And Cholas, imperial Cholas, if you study current affairs, okay, you might find that it is always mentioned that our ancient history, our ancient India had many ways of traditional ways of conserving water. Okay, and few of these ways are very, very popular among the south, especially in the imperial Chola empire. Then you will find that he also took naval expedition to Sri Vijaya, to Kadaram or Sri Vijaya, and you cannot exactly say that what is the real objective or what was the real reason of the expedition. Okay, but it was a naval expedition, and we know that it was successful. Okay. Then we also know that Rajendra I had put all the rebellions down, and he kept his empire very intact even though his empire was vast. So he was that one brave ruler who could actually keep the empire very, very strong, very, very intact, and keep all the enemies at bay. Now, after Rajendra I, now imagine such an enormous empire, such a wide, marvelous and flourishing empire ruled by such a powerful ruler, and now he dies. So, after his death, you will find that Chola Empire basically the extent. See, when Rajendra Varman is there, the Chola Empire is at its peak, like maximum empire, everything is good. But once the Rajendra Varman dies, so will the Chola Empire's mighty power decline. Okay, the river Tungabhadra was the northern boundary, because you know the Tungabhadra, they have captured everything. So river Tungabhadra is the northern boundary of Cholas. The Pandyas, Kerala, Mysore regions, Sri Lanka, Maldives, they all became the part of Chola Empire. And we also know that he married his daughter Amanga Devi to the Vengi Chalukya prince. Okay, and Rajendra I, because he captured over Ganga, etc., he assumed number of titles. For example, Mudi Kondan, Gangai Kondan, Kadaram Kondan. Okay, it is after the names of the places he had actually won. So Kondan means somebody who has like captured over those places. So Kadaram Kondan means capturer of Kadaram. Gangai Kondan means capturer of Gange, like that. And then Pandita Cholan. Okay, like his father, he was also a devout Shaivite, and he also built a temple for that god at a new capital, Gangai Konda, Cholapuram. Okay, he also made liberal endowments, like gave philanthropic contributions to the temple and to the Lord Nataraja temple at Chidambaram, which was built by his father. Okay, and he was also tolerant towards the Vaishnavites, just like his father was tolerant towards Buddhism, Vaishnavites, and other religions. Even he was very tolerant towards Vaishnavites and Buddhist sects. After Rajendra I, the greatness of the Chola Empire was preserved by the rulers like Kulotunga and Kulotunga III. And Kulotunga was basically the grandson of Rajendra I. Okay, and from the like you can say Rajendra I basically was the Nanaji, because it was the daughter whose son was Kutulunga. Okay, and he succeeded the Chola throne and united the Vengi kingdom with the Chola Empire. And during his reign only, you will find that Sri Lanka again becomes independent. That means that Rajendra I is able to have such vast empire, but when his grandson is ruling, he actually loses over Sri Lanka. So he is now limited only in India. And subsequently, you will find that even Vengi, even Mysore regions, they are also captured back by Western Chalungyas. Okay, and Kulotunga I is basically the one who sends embassy to China, and this is what makes it important, especially considering that right now China was at so much of news. So any news related to history, geography, culture, anything to China is important. So Kulotunga I, he sent a large embassy of 72 merchants to China so that he could maintain good relations with China. And now imagine an empire in the south going till north, extreme north, to establish contact with China. And then you will find but Kulotungu III, he's during his time basically the authority has become weak, the empire is losing, and finally there is basically strong fiduciaries that are coming up here and there, and challenging the Chola supremacy. And Rajendra III was the last Chola king who was defeated by then Jatavarman Sundara Pandya, and Chola country was then absorbed by the Pandya Empire. So Pandyan Empire is not as large as it was before, but somewhere they've defeated Cholas and now they've acquired that territory also and put it under Pandya's rule. Before we move forward, this is the map of the Cholas and the other dynasties that were existing. For example, Yadavs, they were Western Chalukyas of Kalyani. Then here you can find Katyas of Andhra Pradesh. Okay, then here it is Kadambas, Banvasi, Gangavadi. Okay, remember, then there is Gangai Konda Cholapuram here. Then there is Thanjavur, or also called as Tanjore. Before you forget, Thanjavur, they are also called as Tanjore. Then Urayur, you already know that earlier it was an old Chola town. Then Madurai, it was the capital of Pandyas in the earlier time. Okay, then similarly here Nellore is in Andhra Pradesh, that you know. And then basically Takkulam. So Takkulam, you already know that it was captured by the Cholas. So these are few territories that I have given you here, and a map to remember them so that you know exactly which place likes where. So you don't need to remember it, but you just need to have a look at it and see it like once and try to remember, and then you can just leave it, because this probably won't be asked. Then is the Chola administration. So now, just like we have studied about the Chalukyas, we studied about the Pallavas, Rashtrakutas, we'll also study about how Chola used to manage their administration. So first we will understand their central government. So what is happening? The Cholas have an excellent system of administration, and this you have to give it to them, because this has been even historians say that this was one of the most beautiful thing about Cholas. Okay, say there was an emperor or the king at the top of the administration. Okay, and you will find that the extent of monarchy or the king power kept on increasing. Okay, there were big capital cities like Tanjore and Gangai Kolla Cholam where the large royal courts were present, and you will find that because to maintain such large courts and large armies, etc., large armies, you need excessive grants also. So excessive grants were given to the temples to reveal that the king was very powerful and very rich. Okay, they undertook royal tours also to increase the efficiency of administration so that they can take care of what is happening on the ground. And there was elaborate administrative machinery also, which had many officials called as Perundanam and Sirudanam to actually look after the entire administration. Now we'll see about the revenues. So the land revenue, just like before, was also the, you can say, a major source of revenue for the Chola Empire, and this department was very well organized. Okay, it was called as a Puravarithana Kallai. Thinnai Kallam. Okay, I know this is a very typical word, and I'm sorry if I've not pronounced it well. But if someone knows the pronunciation, please write it in the comment box. Okay, so this is I think a very typical word. And all the lands, so all the lands you will find that they were carefully surveyed and classified. See what is happening. Even if when we go to the medieval times, you will realize that Alauddin Khilji, Akbar, these are like the great rulers who try to first assess the land, take the measurements, etc., so that they can actually estimate that how much this land can produce and how much this land can give revenue. Similarly, you will find that Cholas are also carefully surveying the land, and after that only they are classifying it for the revenue, that you have to give this much of revenue or that much of revenue. Okay, the residential portion of the village was called as Urnattam, and these and the other lands, okay, like which were belonging to temples, they did not have to give tax, because it was believed that the place where you are living, you don't need to give tax for it, but the place which you can use as a industry or can use to earn something, then that you have to give tax. Okay, besides land revenue, there were tolls and customs on the goods also, which were taken from one place to another, because just like today we have, no, if you go from suppose point A to point B, there'll be like the road constructed and there'll be like a toll house, so you have to give some money here to actually cross. Similarly, there was a concept of tolls there also existing. Okay, and various kinds of professional taxes, like we have a doctor's tax, nurse tax. So professional taxes are put on the people who are doing some professional job. Similarly, here also you will find that professional taxes are being put. And then dues are levied on ceremonial occasions, which is not done in India right now, but it should be. Like there are no, you can say, collections done on marriages, but it should be. And then judicial fines, just like today, that then also existed. Then during the hard times, you will find that their taxes were obviously removed and they were postponed, just like even the government did due to corona. They have actually postponed the GST filings and everything, and what they are doing is they are actually refunding you the amount. If your amount is less than 5 lakh rupees of GST refund, you will get the refund right now, and then later on when you file your GST refund and everything, your applications, then the government will take care of the what it has to give and what you have to give. But right now they are actually refunding you back. So similarly, such was the practice done in that time also. And then Kulotunga I, he became famous by abolishing the tolls like altogether, and he earned the title of Sungam Tavirtha Cholam. Okay, because he was the one who was thought to be as a welfare of the people. Then the main items of the government expenditure were what? Take care of the royal court, take care of the king and his family, then navy, roads, infrastructure, irrigation and canals. So these were the major areas where the king's money, which he earns by the land revenue, etc., is actually being spent. Then comes the military administration. So Cholas, they maintained a regular standing army. This is important because they had a huge army and they had a regular one, so that they don't need to hire people again and again when they have to fight a war. They don't need to have a 3-day time to collect the army. Their army is already standing in regular, and it consisted of like a lot of people. It had people present on elephants, it had people on horses, it had normal foot soldiers also, and it had infantry also. Now about 70 regiments, they were mentioned in the inscriptions, and the royal troops, okay, the troops which belong to the royal family, they were called as Kakiola Perumaddai. Okay, and within this they had a personal troop. So what is happening, even if you know today, the president of India has something called as presidential guards, right? So they are only responsible for actually guarding the president. Similarly, at that time also you will find that the king used to have, the king of Chola, they used to have basically royal troops for maintaining the royal army, like maintaining the royal family, for taking care of the royal family. And within that also they had like a personal troop which used to defend the king itself, and they were called as the Vilai Karakar. like Karar. Okay, and attention was given to the training of army as well as military cantonments and and that is why you will find that Kadagams existed, because you want to train army and military. The Cholas also paid special attention to navy, because you know that they had a good navy also, naval power they were. That is why they were able to cross sea and go to Sri Lanka and Maldives. So the naval achievements of Tamils, they reached climax during the Cholas, and they controlled the Malabar, Coromandel coast both. Okay, so Malabar is this one and Coromandel coast is this one, and they used to extend the empire till this one. In fact, the Bay of Bengal became the Chola Lake for some time, and this has been asked in UPSC mains before, like a very like in one of the old papers it was written that why was Bay of Bengal called as the Chola Lake. It is why, because you will find that Bay of Bengal, okay, the entire Bay of Bengal, the territories around it at one point of time under the Cholas, and that is why it is called as the Chola Lake. Now we will study about the provincial administration. So what is happening? See, Chola Empire is also a very decentralized empire. So what is happening? There is a complete empire. This empire is divided into mandalams. Okay, and each mandalam is then divided into Valanadus, and each Valanadu is then divided into Nadus. Okay, and then each Nadu is divided into lot of villages, and then you will find that there are like officers present at each level to maintain it. So the royal prince or the officers were in charge of mandalams, because mandalams are these big units. Okay, so either the royal people or the officers, they are put as in charge of these mandalams. Then the mandalams are divided into Valanadus. So Valanadus are under a Perinattar. Okay, who is handling them? Perinattar. And then each Valanadu is divided into lot of Nadus, and these Nadus are under Nattars. Okay, and then finally you will find that these Nadus have been divided into villages or Nagars, and then Nagar is under Nagaram. Now, sorry, Nagar is called as a Nagaram, and then you will find that it was under the Nagarattar. And if there is a village, then obviously there will be another officer. So just like that, what you have done, you have divided nation into states, state into districts, districts into villages, and district into villages and rural area and the urban area. Now, after having studied this, what we'll study is the village assemblies. So the system of village autonomy with sabhas and their communities developed during this age. Okay, the two inscriptions, this you need to know, belong to this period, which were basically written by Parnataka one. They were found at Uttarameru, which we have already discussed, because Parnataka one had another Uttarameru inscription also, and this inscription provides details about the formation as well as functions of village council. Okay, the village, it says that was divided into 30 wards. So just like we have a district and it's divided into wards for elections. Okay, similarly you will find that there is a village, it is divided into 30 wards, and each ward used to nominate its member to the village council. See, what is a village council? Village council is basically a democratically run body. Okay, and why is it running? So that it can take care of the village and its activities and everything, starting from contribution to what investments should be done and where it should be done, everything. So now this village council is basically how will you appoint it. So in either the king can appoint it, but this is not the case in Chola Empire. It is a democratic run institution where village council people are appointed by the people themselves. So what you will do is, you have divided the village into 30 sub parts, or basically you can say wards, and each ward is going to elect its own person which will sit in the village council. Okay, and the elect in the sense nominate here, because election is not the word that has come right now, and the qualifications to become a ward member. So what they've done is, just like if you know that India has certain qualifications for becoming a president, that you should be minimum of some 30 years of age or 25 years of age, and then you should be citizen of India, you should not hold any office of profit. Similarly, they have put qualifications to who can become a ward member. A, he should have his own residence, he should be 30 years and above, or and below 70 years, so that neither too old, neither too young. Then he should have knowledge of Vedas also, and he should be basically ownership of 1/4 of value of a land. So you have given basically he should be well read, well educated, well like holding some property, and also in the right age to actually so that he can take care of the affairs of the village and be part of a village council. However, there were certain norms for disqualification also. Like, first of all, who were in the past member of the committee, they cannot become member again, especially they have been for the past 3 years. Then who basically have not submitted any of these 4 accounts that were needed by the committee, so they were disqualified. Then the people who had committed sins in the past, and the people who had stolen property of others. So these are the disqualification criteria on the person who wants to be a village council member but can't become. Now from the persons duly nominated, the one was to be chosen as the one was to be chosen for each ward, and here by what system they will be choose? They will be choose by Kudavolai system for a year. Okay, and the names of eligible persons, they will be written on a palm leaf and they will be put in a pot. Okay, and what you will do is basically you will invite a young girl or a boy who will take out 30 names, one for each ward. Out of this, basically it's just like the chit system where you place all the chits, whatever names you have gotten in one pot, you will call someone and you start picking chits, and that whichever chit comes for whichever ward, you just like put the numbers on them. Okay, and then you will find that they were divided into 6 variants, such as the names have been given here to take up the 6 different functions of village, because village administration also has many functions. Like there will be, you will find that they have religious functions also, they have economic functions also, social functions also. So all these functions are divided into 6 branches, and you will find that they are asked to take one of the 6 branches. The committee members were then called as the Varya Perumakkal, and they usually, they see, now you have found a village council, now you need a place where they can meet regularly. So you will find that a temple was a place where they used to meet regularly, and they used to pass resolutions also. And number of committees and the ward members, they varied from village to village, because if the village is small, number of ward members will be small. If the village is big, the number of ward members will be like larger. Then we come to the socio-economic life during the imperial Cholas. So caste system, which was widely prevalent during the like even the earlier times, it also became you can say rigid here, and even in the Chola period caste system was present. The Brahmins and Kshatriyas, they enjoyed special privileges. The inscriptions of the later period of Chola, they mention about the 2 major divisions, and this you need to remember, which is basically Idangai caste and Valangai caste. Okay, however you will find that there was a cooperation also between subcaste and caste also in the social and religious life. But the point is, position of women has been deteriorating since the Vedic age, and it has deteriorated. The position of women has not improved. The practice of sati, child marriage, Devdasi system, polygamy, they all are existing. Okay, and Devdasi system, if you know, was recently in news also, because see, what is the Devdasi system? Wherein basically Devdasi, it means somebody, a girl who is basically dasi of God. She has basically devoted her entire life to the God. Okay, she'll just live in temples and she'll dance in the temple, she'll take care of the temple, but basically she'll be attached to the temple itself. So this Devdasi system was very, 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 very prevalent. Then both Shaivism and Vaishnavism, they continued to flourish during this Chola period, and a number of temples were built who were patronized by the Chola kings and queens. Okay, these temples were the main centers. See, this was a question asked in UPSC mains, that how temples built in north versus temples of the Chola, they were different. See, temples of the north were just a worship place, but temples in the south were not just a worship place. They were the places where village assemblies used to meet. They were places which used to economic decisions were taken and resolutions were passed. So temples were not just like coming and going for a religious setup. They were much more than that. Similarly, temples in North India, you will find they were much smaller, but temples in South, since they are performing so many functions, they had to be bigger. Temples in the North might have village endowments or not, but temples in the South definitely had village endowments, so that they can take care of the temple and its activities. Okay, so the temples, they remained the centers of economic activity during this period, and this is the major difference between the North and the Southern Indian temples. The Matthas, they had a greater influence during this period. Both agriculture and industry flourished. Forest lands were reclaimed, and you will find that irrigation tanks were constructed. Okay, then you will find that the weaving industry also, particularly the silk weaving at Kanchi, also flourished. The metal works were developed owing to the great demand of images of temples. See, actually what is happening is, either you see temple as just a religious place, or if you see as an economic activity, your whole perception changes. If you are just seeing it as a religious place, you won't see it as a marketplace, you won't see it as a place where people can meet and they can actually shop and etc. But if you convert it into an economic activity, then you will find that temples become the marketplaces themselves. So that is why you will find that commerce and trade was prevalent during in these areas. Gold, silver and copper coins were issued in plenty denominations. The commercial contracts were there between Cholas and China, Sumatra, Java, Arabia, telling you that they had an extensive trade with the outsiders, like with the foreigners. And then you will find that the Arabian horses, they were imported in the large numbers, so that they can have a long regular standing army. So this was about the socio-economic life in the Chola Empire. Now we will study about the education and literature. So education and literature, they were given real importance in the Chola Empire. Okay, besides the temples and the mattas, which were the educational centers, which are the traditional education centers, you will also find that there were several dedicated education institutions that flourished. Just like there was Nalanda, there were like dedicated educational institutions that existed even during Cholas also. The inscription at Enayaram, Tirumudukal and Tirubhuvani, they provide details of the colleges that existed then. Now imagine, you're not just giving them temples to study, you're giving them proper colleges, okay, to study. Apart from Vedas and epics, you will find subjects like mathematics, medicines, they were also taught in these institutions. And obviously, if you have to run these institutions, you need to give them certain money, and that money will come from the endowment of lands. Okay. Then you will find that the development of Tamil literature. Okay, just like we saw in Rashtrakuta, there was Kannada literature and Jain literature. So here you will find that development of Tamil literature has reached its peak during the Chola period. Okay, Sivaka Sintamani, written by the Tiruka Kadavayar and the Kundala Kesi, belong to the 10th century. Now these words are very hard to pronounce, specifically for a person like me. So I'm sorry if I pronounce them wrong, but please do correct me. I'll be more than happy to correct myself also. Then you will find that the Ramayan composed by Kamban and actually, you know what, this Ramayan composed by Kamban, if you have been watching Ramayan, which was which was shown on DD, that Doordarshan, in this quarantine period, you must have heard the Ramanand Sagar always coming in the end and telling you from various sources he has taken the information to construct this Ramayan, visual Ramayan, and he mentioned that the Ramayan of the South, written in the Tamil by Kamban, he has used that information. So this is how you remember and relate stuff. Okay, then you will find that there are other masterpieces also in the Tamil language written in this age. Then there is Jayan Kondar, okay, who is Kalinga Tupparani, okay, he describes that Kalinga war. See, it's easy to remember, but it's hard to pronounce because Kalinga is mentioned. That means it is talking about the Kalinga war, which was fought by Kulotunga I, not the Ashoka war, but by Kulotunga I, who is the Chola ruler. Then you will find that Muvarula was written by Otakuthar and it depicts the life of the 3 Chola kings. Okay, similarly, there are other works also which you can read from here, and you will find that lot of work, okay, was done in Tamil. But having said that, you will find that other work also. For example, Jain work also is going on, and there is like Buddha Charita also. So you will find that lot of Buddha Mitra also. That means what? That there are, like, the ruler is there, he is following Shaivite, but he's a Shaivite or he is following Shaivism, but he is not imposing his religion. Like, if you are following another religion and if you want to write something, you're more than welcome. So there is like a tolerance in the society. Then we talk about the art and architecture, and this is something which is like the most important part of Chola Empire. Like, if you have to remember one thing from ancient history and art and culture point of view, is the art and architecture existing during the Chola Empire. So the Dravidian style of art and architecture, it reached, okay, its perfection under the Cholas. And I've told you before also, the Dravidian style of architecture, which was basically the temple making style, it started during the Pallavas, but it was Cholas where it reached its height. Okay. The chief feature of the Chola temple was the Viman, and Viman is that high going pyramid shaped thing above the temple. Okay, and the early Chola temples were found, they can be found at Kodamballur and many other districts, like for example at Srinivasanallur in Tiruchirappalli district. Okay, the big temple, see, there are 2 temples that you need to remember for sure. One is the Rajarajavan temple, which is the Brihadeshwara temple, and other is that Gangaikunda Cholapuram by Rajendra I. So these 2 temples you need to remember from your art and architecture point of view also. Okay, so you will find that this Rajaraja I, the temple, that Brihadeshwara temple, it is like the epitome of, or you can say the masterpiece of Dravida style of temple architecture. It consists of Viman, as I told you, it has Ardha Mandap also, it has Maha Mandap, and then you will find it has a large pavilion in front, which is also called as a Nandi Mandap. Okay, another notable contribution made by Cholas was basically the Siva temple. I told you, the Gangaikunda Chorampulam, which was built by the Rajaraja's son Rajendra I. Okay, the Arathaveswara temple, this is also very, very important. It is built at Tanjore district. Okay, and this actually, what happens whenever a question is asked in UPSC prelims, like, I don't know why they have asked this Aryabhatheswara temple before also, and I think it is because everybody remembers Brihadeshwara temple and Rajendra I's temple. People forget that Aryabhatheswara temple is also from the Chola Empire. So now I hope that I have repeated it so many times that you will not forget it. Okay. Finally, you will find that Cholas, they also made very rich contributions to the art of sculpture. Like sculpture making achieved its maximum, or you can say its height here. The walls of the Chola temples, if you see, even the pyramids, etc., you will find that they contain numerous sculptures and icons of large sizes, and they have very fine details. Okay, the bronze statue of the Chola period is already very famous, which is of the Nataraja. Okay, or of the dancing Shiva, which has a damru, which has a fire, like one leg up, one leg down, and then like hair locks all bikhrawa, and then Ganga coming out, and then there is like a era of you can say light which is going around. This is like nothing but a Nataraja murti that was basically built of bronze, and it was very famous. You can say it's like the masterpiece of the craftsmanship of the Chola workers. Okay, this is a bronze statue. And you will also find that the Chola paintings were found on the walls of many temples, for example, the Tanjore temples. Now, I am not telling you everything about the Nataraja statue or the bronze sculpture, because firstly, this forms a part of your art and culture, and secondly, we will cover it when we cover the art and culture series. So, I'm hoping you'll have patience, because if we start combining things, we won't end up anywhere. So, we will just keep them separate and try to cover book by book. After this, we actually have finished the entire Chola empire, and in the next class we will start with what we call as the spread of the Indian culture in the other Asian countries. But before that, what we will do, we will just take one lecture and revise the entire history, starting from the ancient, like the entire ancient history, and try to collate it into one part of what we have studied in the Tamil Nadu book. And after that we will move to the medieval time, because this particular chapter, chapter 14, is actually, you can say, a linking chapter between India, like the ancient time and the medieval time. Okay, and here we will be studying that how Indian culture finds its resemblance in so many Asian countries. And I'll tell you that this chapter is much more important from geographical, from migration chapter point of view, from mains point of view, than from prelims, or you can say than from history point of view, because it is from here once UPSC asked a question about the migration and how the culture in so many of the Southeast Asian countries still resembles India. And if you could have mentioned these particular examples, I'm sure you would have aced that particular question. Okay, so with a positive note, we end this chapter, and we will bring about a next lecture on the revision. Thank you.